June 28, 1914, Sarajevo. A 19-year-old steps off a curb, raises a pistol, and fires twice. Within 5 weeks, 5 empires are mobilizing for war. Within 4 years, those empires are gone. Within a generation, roughly 20 million people are dead. A teenager too frail to pass a guerrilla fitness test somehow triggers the deadliest conflict the world had ever seen. This is the story of Gavrilo Princip. To understand how a sickly teenager ended up reshaping the map of the entire world, we have to go back to where he came from, decades before that street corner in Sarajevo. Gavrilo Princip was born on July 25, 1894, in a small village called Oblij in the hills of western Bosnia. His family were poor Bosnian Serb farmers. His father also worked as a postman, carrying mail on foot and by horse across rough terrain. Gavrilo was one of 9 children. 6 of them died in infancy or early childhood. He grew up small, thin, and often sick. Bosnia at the time was under Austro-Hungarian control, having been formally annexed from Ottoman rule in 1908. Many Bosnian Serbs resented that rule and dreamed of unification with Serbia, or a broader South Slavic state. That resentment shaped Princip from a young age. As a teenager, Princip moved to Sarajevo and then Belgrade for schooling, and became involved with a loose youth movement called Young Bosnia. Young Bosnia was not one organized party. It was a network of students, poets, and idealists who wanted an end to Austro-Hungarian rule in the Balkans. Some members leaned toward violence. Many did not. Princip read widely, wrote poetry, and was known among friends as intense and serious. 1912, during the build-up to the First Balkan War, he tried to join Serbian guerrilla fighters known as Chetniks. He was rejected. The reason given was that he was too small and too physically weak to fight. The teenager who would help start a world war could not pass a basic military screening 2 years earlier. That rejection stung him, by most accounts, for a long time afterward. That contradiction, a figure history remembers as a decisive actor who was, in reality, dismissed and overlooked in his own moment, is one that keeps resurfacing throughout Princip's story. It shows up again almost immediately. Around 1913 and into 1914, Princip connected with a small circle of young radicals, including a printer's apprentice named Nedeljko Čabrinović and a young man named Trifko Grabej. They were loosely tied to networks in Belgrade, some of which had links to a secret Serbian nationalist organization known as the Black Hand. The exact chain of command and how much the Serbian government knew in advance remains disputed by historians. To this day, what is well documented is that this small group of young men, most in their late teens or early 20s, decided to assassinate Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, during his planned visit to Sarajevo. Franz Ferdinand was scheduled to inspect military maneuvers and visit the city on June 28, 1914. That date was not neutral. It was Vidovdan, St. Vitus Day, a solemn day in Serbian national memory, marking the anniversary of the 1389 Battle of Kosovo. For Serbian nationalists, holding a celebration of Austro-Hungarian power on that particular day felt like a deliberate insult. The group obtained pistols and small bombs, reportedly smuggled in from Serbia with help along the way. They were young, poorly trained, and, by several historical accounts, not especially confident their plan would work. Several of them carried cyanide capsules, intending to kill themselves immediately after the act rather than be captured. On the morning of June 28th, they positioned themselves at different points along the route the Archduke's motorcade would take through the city. The first attempt failed almost immediately. As the Archduke's open car passed, Nedeljko Čabrinović threw a bomb at it. The driver saw it coming and accelerated. The bomb bounced off the folded back of the car and exploded under the vehicle behind it, wounding several people. Chabrinovic swallowed his cyanide capsule and jumped into the nearby Miljacka River to avoid capture. The cyanide, likely old and degraded, only made him violently ill. The river, that time of year, was only a few inches deep. He was pulled out by the crowd and beaten before police arrived. It did not go well. Most of the other conspirators, including Princip, lost their nerve or their opportunity in the confusion, and did nothing as the motorcade sped past. The Archduke continued on to a scheduled reception at the City Hall, visibly shaken and reportedly angry that so little had been done to protect him. He insisted on visiting the hospital afterward to check on those wounded by the bomb. That decision, a last-minute change of plans meant as a gesture of concern, is what ultimately put him back in Princip's path. Here's a quick reminder before we get to what happened next. If you are enjoying this kind of deep historical dive, consider subscribing, because there is a lot more of this coming. The Archduke's driver was not properly informed of the changed route back toward the hospital. He turned onto Franz Josef Street, the original planned route, by mistake. An official in the car realized the error and told him to stop and reverse. The car stalled right in front of a delicatessen on the corner near the Latin Bridge. Gavrilo Princip happened to be standing on that exact corner. This is where one of the most repeated stories about this event needs a correction. Popular retellings often claim Princip had given up on the plot entirely and was casually eating a sandwich at a delicatessen when the car simply rolled up in front of him by pure chance. That version is a legend, widely repeated but not solidly confirmed by historical evidence. What is documented is that Princip was still positioned along the route as part of the ongoing plot, and that the stalled car in front of him was the result of a genuine navigational accident, not that he had abandoned the mission or was there by total coincidence. The sandwich detail specifically cannot be verified and should be treated as folklore that grew up around the event. What is true, and almost stranger than the myth, is that a wrong turn and a stalled engine put the Archduke directly in front of the one armed conspirator still in position. Princip stepped forward, drew his pistol and fired twice at close range. The first shot hit Sophie, the Archduke's wife, in the abdomen. The second hit Franz Ferdinand in the neck. Witnesses reported the Archduke pleading with his wife to stay alive for their children as they were rushed away. Both died within the hour. Princip attempted to turn the gun on himself and also tried his cyanide capsule. Bystanders wrestled him to the ground before he could complete either. His cyanide capsule, like Chabrinovic's, appears to have been too old to work effectively. He was beaten by the crowd and then taken into police custody. That single act, and what followed from it, is the dark turn at the center of this entire story. Under the alliance system that crisscrossed Europe at the time, the assassination set off a chain reaction that no single government fully controlled. Austria-Hungary blamed Serbia and issued a deliberately harsh ultimatum. When Serbia's response fell short of full compliance, Austria-Hungary declared war. Russia, bound by treaty to defend Serbia, began mobilizing. Germany, allied with Austria-Hungary, declared war on Russia and then France. Britain entered when Germany invaded neutral Belgium. Within about 5 weeks of 2 gunshots on a street corner, most of the great powers of Europe were at war. To put that in perspective, imagine every major country on a continent falling like dominoes, one declaration of war triggering the next, entirely because of treaties signed years earlier for completely different reasons. That is genuinely how fast it happened. The war that followed lasted over 4 years and killed an estimated 15 to 20 million people, soldiers and civilians combined, with millions more wounded. Four empires, the Austro-Hungarian, German, Russian, and Ottoman, collapsed entirely. By its end, the political map of Europe and the Middle East was redrawn almost completely. But Princip himself never saw most of this unfold. Because he was 19 at the time of the assassination, just under the threshold of 20 required for a death sentence under Austro-Hungarian law, he escaped execution. He was tried and convicted, then sentenced to 20 years in prison, the maximum allowed for someone his age. He was sent to Terezín, a fortress prison in what is now the Czech Republic, and held in harsh conditions, including long stretches in a cold, damp cell. He had already shown signs of tuberculosis before his arrest, and the prison conditions made it far worse. Over the following years, his health collapsed. By some accounts, his arm was amputated due to the spread of the disease into his bones. He reportedly weighed under 90 pounds, roughly the weight of an average 12-year-old, by the final months of his life. Gavrilo Princip died in prison on April 28, 1918, still short of his 24th birthday. The war he had helped ignite did not end until that November, 7 months after his death. He never lived to see the outcome of what he started. That unresolved question, whether Princip should be remembered as a terrorist or a freedom fighter, is the same tension that first showed up when the Chetniks turned him away for being too weak to matter. It never really went away. It just kept changing shape depending on who was in power. In the years after his death, in the newly formed Kingdom of Yugoslavia, Princip was increasingly cast as a martyr and a hero of South Slav liberation from foreign rule. Under communist Yugoslavia after World War II, that image only grew. A plaque and a set of his footprints were embedded in the pavement at the assassination site, and it became something close to a pilgrimage spot. When Yugoslavia violently broke apart in the 1990s, that same monument became politically radioactive. The footprints were removed. Sarajevo, now capital of a country where Bosniaks and Croats made up much of the population alongside Serbs, no longer wanted a shared civic monument to a Bosnian Serb nationalist, however it had once been framed. Decades later, in 2014, on the 100th anniversary of the assassination, a new statue of Princip was unveiled. Not in Sarajevo itself, but in the Serb-run part of the city, in a move that reignited the same old argument all over again. Historians still do not fully agree, and likely never will, on where the honest line falls between political idealist, national hero, and the 18-year-old, sometimes listed as 19, depending on how his age is calculated at the exact date, who committed a political killing. Both readings are documented. Neither one erases the other. This pattern, a single act completely reinterpreted by each new generation depending on their politics, is not unique to Princip. Historical figures like Che Guevara or the various leaders of anti-colonial uprisings have gone through similar cycles, condemned as criminals by one era and celebrated as liberators by the next, often for the exact same actions. So where does any of this land today in an ordinary life, far from a Bosnian street corner? The war Princip triggered redrew borders that still exist on current maps, created and dissolved countries, including the Yugoslavia, that no longer exists at all, and helped set the terms for the peace settlement that many historians link directly to the outbreak of an even larger war just 2 decades later. The term, "the shot heard round the world," now used loosely for almost any small event with outsized consequences, gets applied to Sarajevo as often as to any battle in history. If you have ever heard someone describe a small incident as something that started a war, there is a decent chance the phrase traces back, directly or indirectly, to this exact event. Picture that street corner again. A stalled car. A delicatessen storefront. A 19-year-old who, 2 years earlier, had been told he was too weak to be useful. Standing there with a pistol, he became, however briefly and however unintentionally on the scale of what followed, one of the most consequential individuals of the 20th century. Does knowing that the sandwich story is probably just legend change how you picture that moment? The wrong turn was real. The stalled engine was real. The rest has been rewritten by every generation that followed, to fit whatever story about him they needed to tell. If you want more stories like this, the ones where one small human moment quietly reshapes the entire world, subscribe for the next one. And in the comments, let us know what part of this surprised you the most, or which historical figure you want us to dig into next.